Welcome to the Straits Times National Day Rally post-show. Good evening, I'm Chow Su-an. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong has just delivered his National Day Rally speech. Unlike previous years, this year's speech didn't talk too much about government policy. Instead, it was a speech where PM Lee tackled some thorny and sensitive issues for Singaporeans. So without further ado, here's 3 things you need to know about 2021's National Day Rally. Number 1, more help for low-wage workers. PM Lee revealed that the progressive wage model will be extended to more sectors and more workers, starting with the retail sector next year. Also, firms hiring foreigners will all have to pay all Singaporean staff at least a local qualifying salary of $1,400.
The cost of higher wages for the lower wage workers will have to be shared. Workers have to reskill and become more productive. Employers have to absorb part of the additional wage costs. The government will help them with transitional support. But businesses will still have to pass on some of the costs to their customers. So all of us as consumers must also chip in. Pay a little bit more for some of our favorite things, like bubble tea or bak chor mee, with or without ham, to help the shop cover higher cleaning and waste collection costs.
Now, one group of low-wage workers PM Lee expressed particular concern for were delivery workers. Especially during COVID-19, they have become a familiar sight, delivering orders day and night.
Yet delivery workers have no employment contracts with the online platforms. Therefore, they lack the basic job protection that most employees enjoy, like workplace injury compensation, union representation, and employer CPF. Besides delivery workers, there are also some lower wage workers in other jobs who also have an employee-like relationship with platforms. They too will find it harder to afford housing, healthcare, and eventually retirement. More people are taking up this type of work, so this problem is growing. The Ministry of Manpower is studying it and will be doing consultations. We must address the issues to give these workers more secure futures.
And number 2, ensuring fair hiring. The Tripartite Alliance for Fair and Progressive Employment Practices, or TAFEP's, guidelines will be enshrined in Singapore's law. This will give the authorities a wider range of options to ensure fair treatment at the workplace.
We will model our approach on how we deal with another class of disputes, those over salaries or wrongful dismissal. In such disputes, conciliation and mediation have to be tried first. And only when those fail does the matter go before an employment claims tribunal, which will arbitrate and decide the case. We will create a similar tribunal to deal with workplace discrimination. And this will protect workers against discrimination based on nationality, whether you're Singaporean or not, or between different non-Singaporean nationalities. It will also prohibit other kinds of discrimination covered by TAFEP. Women will get better protection, and discrimination based on age, race, religion, and disability will also be disallowed.
PM Lee then addressed the anxieties over foreigners, which he described as a very delicate subject. While the government will continue to tighten the employment and S-Pass criteria over time, PM Lee said Singapore must continue to be open and connected to the world.
Foreigners who are here in Singapore, they strengthen our team. They are our colleagues and our neighbors and friends. During COVID-19, some have endured personal hardships, perhaps been separated from families who are abroad, or been stuck outside Singapore and unable to return home here. Many worked on the front line, shoulder to shoulder with Singaporeans. They too have contributed to Singapore. We must not turn our backs on them and give the impression that Singapore is becoming xenophobic and hostile to foreigners. It would gravely damage our reputation as an international hub. It would cost us investments, jobs, and opportunities. It would be disastrous for us And most of all, it is not who we aspire to be.
And number 3, race and religion. With the issue of race and racism coming to the forefront during the pandemic, PM Lee said that a Maintenance of Racial Harmony Act will be introduced to deal with racial issues.
Today, we have various laws dealing with serious racial offences, like hate crime or causing racial enmity. But these laws are scattered in different places, like the Penal Code and the Sedition Act, and they focus purely on crimes and punishments rather than persuasion and rehabilitation. We intend to pass specific legislation on racial harmony. We will call it the Maintenance of Racial Harmony Act. And it will collect together in one place all the government's power to deal with racial issues. It will also incorporate some softer and gentler touches. For example, the power to order someone who has caused offense to stop doing it and to make amends by learning more about the other race and mending ties with them. And this softer approach will heal hurt instead of leaving resentment.
PM Lee also revealed that Muslim nurses in public healthcare can wear their tudungs with their uniforms from November.
Because the tudung is not just a matter for Muslims, it's a national issue. Since then, the government has been watching the situation closely. We observe, by and large, interactions between the races remain comfortable. Non-Muslims have become more used to seeing Muslim women wearing the tudung. And Muslim women wearing tudung are generally also quite at ease, interacting socially with non-Muslim men and women in most settings. Specifically in hospitals, some of the non-uniformed staff do wear the tudung, and we saw that their relationship with patients and colleagues was all right. Furthermore, younger Singaporeans are more accepting of racial and religious differences.
And there you have it, the 3 things you needed to know about National Day Rally 2021. Now let's cross over to Dylan for some analysis. He's with the Straits Times senior political correspondent, Grace Ho, and they're going to analyse PM Lee's speech. Over to you, Dylan.
Thanks, Suen. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dylan Ang, and those were the key highlights of Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong's National Day Rally speech. But what do the announcements today mean for Singaporeans? Joining me now to take a closer look at his speech is senior political correspondent Grace Ho. Welcome, Grace. Now let's dive right in. Now, Grace, you know the National Day Rally, right, is seen as the most important political speech of the year, and you know it's held annually except for last year when it was called off due to COVID-19. But how different is this rally compared to previous years, and is there anything particularly surprising about this?
Okay, well, thank you, Dylan. I think to set the broad context, the National Day Rally speech is used by the Prime Minister to address the country on key issues and challenges, to make maybe major policy announcements on the economy and future plans, and even the country's achievements. But as you rightly pointed out, last year it was cancelled and replaced by a major speech which the Prime Minister gave in Parliament instead. But this year we're back to the usual schedule. It's just that, because of the pandemic, it's still a scaled back hybrid version, with some audience in the studio and some on Zoom. What's surprising for me is that, there was no talk about what's going on in the world this year, or any lengthy exposition about COVID-19, which maybe some people might have expected in the pandemic. But these are issues which have been covered extensively at various platforms, in various speeches by cabinet members, including the Prime Minister himself. So it's good that the speech really cut to the chase and focused on concrete measures that will be taken going forward. The second surprising thing perhaps is in the context of, many Singaporeans tuning into the rally, thinking that there will be, goodies, or big announcements, or, new projects like Greater Southern Waterfront, for example, some time ago. But this year, the Prime Minister in his speech scaled all of that down into a more sort of intimate scale, and he addressed head-on what Singaporeans feel and what they fear. And a lot of it has to be seen in the context of the pandemic because, with it having dragged on for nearly 2 years now, anxieties are running high among some Singaporeans in terms of job security or access to opportunities, whether their employers are perhaps giving jobs to foreigners from other countries. And so the Prime Minister then explicitly mentioned how, although most Singaporeans do understand the economic argument for having foreign workers here, but there are personal and emotional considerations that affect, their lived experiences. So I think that's where, qualitatively, there is something a little bit different about this year's speech. Yeah.
Okay, but Grace, let's drill down, to the three key areas of Mr. Lee's speech. He mentioned a lot of things, but I think three key areas that we like to focus on would be low wage workers for one, foreigners in Singapore, as well as race relations. Let's start with what he said about low wage workers. What stands out for you?
Okay, I think broadly, these three issues, they're not new in that sense. They have been vigorously debated at length in Parliament. How do you best address the situation for low-wage workers in a targeted but effective way, for example. But for low-wage workers, I think the expansion of the progressive wage model to many more sectors, for one, and also the requirement for companies which hire foreign workers to pay all their local employees, at least the local qualifying salary, which wasn't the case previously. And in terms of foreigners, the specific point about giving Singapore's employment watchdog, TAFEP, more teeth legislatively by enshrining what are existing guidelines into law. Labour MPs and even opposition members have for a long time argued that moral suasion and putting some of these recalcitrant companies on the watch list may not be enough. And so finally you're seeing a lot of that coming into fruition. Race and religion, again tying back to COVID-19 insecurities, you've seen a lot of that manifested in racist behaviour, even physical assaults. And so the Prime Minister is trying to address that in a very concrete way by passing specific legislation through a Maintenance of Racial Harmony Act, which will collect together in one place all the government's powers to deal with racial issues. And of course, another major announcement that starting in November, Muslim nurses in the public healthcare sector will be allowed to wear tudung with their uniforms if they wish to.
Do you think, Prime Minister Lee's announcements today, would they move the needle, so to say, for Singapore for these rather thorny issues?
Absolutely. I think you see it in the structure of the speech. There's no fat in it. It cuts to the chase in terms of the issues which have taken on greater urgency and have also kind of bubbled to the surface because of the pandemic. Whichever way you look at it, these are the key issues which have gained momentum and traction over the past 1.5 years. We've heard about race and religion from, for example, the Home Affairs and Law Minister, and through various forums organized by the Straits Times, and other, interreligious organizations as well. We've heard about the economy from the Finance and Trade and Industry Ministers, and, 4G leaders. And Singaporeans themselves have taken, online and offline, to air their unhappiness. But, the culmination at the end of this year is this speech by the Prime Minister himself, which draws together all the different threats, all the different issues, and sets out measures that will be taken. So that really sets a baseline, it sets a concrete floor to some of these concerns by the public. But at the same time, he also takes pains to caution that whatever Singapore does has to be adjusted based on its own needs and not what other countries do, especially on issues of race and religion, which will always be sensitive. And then finally also telling Singaporeans that, it takes two hands to clap, right? So yes, foreigners have to play their part in integrating into society here, but Singaporeans must also, welcome them and understand, why they are needed, in order to shore up our economy. So yes, I think it's definitely helped to clear the air, on some of these thorny issues, as you mentioned. Yeah.
Now, we've spoken a lot about what PM Lee said in his speech, but what about what he didn't say? What's missing from his speech that perhaps stood out for you?
Well, over the past year, there's been much talk of political succession, and which 4G leaders is going to step up to be the next PM in waiting. But then again, whether or not this is the appropriate platform to address the issue, is subjective. But the Prime Minister had earlier agreed to stay on until such a time when the new 4G leader is chosen and ready to take over, and the next general election has to be held by 2025. So that's a question that can be answered further down.
Well, thank you very much, Grace, once again for your insights. That was the Straits Times senior political correspondent, Grace Ho, on this year's National Day rally. Back to you, Suen.
Thank you, Grace and Dylan, for that analysis. We've reached the end of our show. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Chao Suen. Bye-bye and have a wonderful week ahead.